Hello, my name is Marcel Lopes dos Santos. I'm an international student from Brazil, and I'm completing the first year as a PhD student at the School of Kinesiology, Applied Health and Recreation at Oklahoma State University. I'll be talking about some of the data that I collected during my thesis, and the title of the study is Body Mass as the Optimal Load Predictor for Power Clean Variations, a Practical Approach. So a little bit of a background. We know that success in sports relies on several factors, such as technique, tactics, and physical fitness. And we're going to be talking about more specifically in this presentation about mechanical power. And we know that power is the combination of velocity, and you can see in this graph at the left, and force. So the force times velocity relationship. This is from a study from Sukomel from 2017, and he listed a lot of exercises and derivatives of weightlifting exercises, and each one of them emphasize more one of those capacities more than the other. So for example, if you want to perform jump shrugs or hang high pull, you're going to be more focused on the velocity component of the power. And whereas if you're performing those two exercises over here, you're going to be lifting very heavy, but you cannot do it very fast. And it depends of what your athlete needs, so you can implement the right exercises for them. In order to get optimal results, they are expected to train at a load that is called optimal load, which is pretty much when you can find a balance between velocity and force and reach a peak power output. To get there, they have to perform a 1 repetition maximal test. So they have to perform a maximal test and that specific exercise, and from that you can retest them in 4 to 8 relative percentage of that max in order to find the peak power output. This is a summary of how the testing procedures usually occur. So they have to rest for 24 hours. They perform a max test. After 3 days, they have to perform the maximal test just to make sure the results that they get in the first test are true. And then after another 3 days, they perform the optimal load test when they test the relative percentage of that max. This whole process can take up to 10 days. So it's a very time consuming. If you're working with a large roster of athletes, it can take a while. So I proposed maybe we can identify the intensity and exercise that elicit a peak power output based on the relative percentage of the participant's body mass instead of using 1 RM. The new hypothesis here will be there's no difference regardless of exercise and relative intensity. And if it works, we can pretty much shift from 10 days testing from a 1 day testing when they only have to rest for 24 hours. They step on the scale, and then we perform this test with 4 to 8 relative percentages of their body mass, so we can find the peak power output for each exercise. In case you're not familiar, here's some pictures of the exercises that I tested doing this study. So the first one, hang power clean. Lifting the bar from the knees, they have to bring the bar upward to neck level, and they have to catch in a quarter squat position and projecting their elbows forward. The hang high pull, it's pretty much the first two sections of this exercise, so we're just excluding the catch phase. They just have to lift as fast as possible up to neck level. And the mid-thigh clean pull, it's somewhere in between the hang high pull. They're gonna perform pretty much the same thing. They're gonna perform the triple extension of lower body, but they don't lift the bar. It's just they just have to shrug their shoulders very explosively. So the subjects for this study were 15 healthy males with 2 years of experience in resistance training and proven proficiency in the power clean or hang power clean, just to minimize possible injuries. for lifting heavy weights with those exercises. This is a descriptive of the subjects, and we randomized both order intensities to minimize biases, and they performed 7 different intensities, so ranging from 30 to 90% of their body mass. They were allowed 2 minutes of rest between trials. We had infrared cameras to collect the center of mass velocity, so the velocity component of the equation. And force plates were recording the ground reaction force, the force component. Power at the end was ground reaction force times center of mass velocity. This is pretty much what we did. So after the bureaucracy, after having approval IRB, contacting people and recruiting subjects, they performed a pre-test when they were familiarized with the exercises. After 48 hours, they started participating in the experimental sections, and with 48 hours in between them. And again, both order and exercises were randomized. So results. I performed a 2-way repeated measures ANOVA, so I could see the interaction between exercise and intensity. I started with the descriptive statistics, and it's in the previous slide with all the information from the subjects. Then I inspected the data via box plot and analyzed the z-scores distribution to see if I had outliers. And then I performed Shapiro-Wilks test to check normality of the data. The p was over 0.05, so we were good. Then I performed the Levine's test for homogeneity of variances. And sphericity holds for an interaction was also pretty good, so we got a p of 0.43 for exercise times intensity. And the test for within subjects effects told me that I could reject the null. So there is a difference in between our interaction and exercise intensity. And last but not least, I performed a Bonferroni post hoc multiple comparisons test to see the effects of the interaction. Alpha was at 0.05. So this is what I got. What is interesting here is that you can see that pretty much the exercises, they all differ from each other across the range of intensities. But the peak, the highest peak power was found at 80 and the hang hypo exercise. And it was statistically different than the other two. How do we interpret that? So peak power output can be identified, which is a good thing. That was the question of the study. We found a peak during the hang power clean at 80% of body mass, the hang high pull at 80% of body mass, and the mid thigh clean pull at 90% of body mass. So really heavy load. But it was not different than any other intensity, which was interesting. The highest peak power across all exercises, which was the main question of the study, was at 80% of body mass for the hang high pull. Some limitations that we had, like it's a cross-sectional intervention, so we could only assess that this peak power in one session, so we don't know what's going to happen if they train for weeks at this very same intensity, if they can get the same adaptations from the traditional method. So that's that's an idea for further studies. Relative strength. My sample size was like individuals with 2 years of experience, so we can get better results if we have a cohort of athletes with similar muscle mass, because if you have individuals that are too strong, have too muscle mass, that is going to influence in a body mass percentage when you're converting that to prescribe the load that they're going to be lifting. Some of the benefits, practicality. Like I said, we can save a lot of time, and its cost of testing several athletes, and its safety, because they're not going to have to be lifting heavy loads, so performing maximal tests with those complex exercises. And if you want to utilize the two less complex exercises like the hang hypo and the meet hypo to teach the other exercise, you can refer to those numbers and maximize the training adaptations by using the training load. This is a reference that I used for that study, and this is a link to my thesis, and there's the data and the information is more complete there. Uh, Thanks for listening, and I will be answering any questions that you might have in the discussion. So yeah.